$80 shouldn't cost a man his dignity, but that's exactly what my daughter-in-law tried to charge me on a grey Friday in Cleveland. I walked into Lakewood Savings on November 14th with a passbook, a plan to get a trim at Frank's barbershop, and just enough pride to ask for what was already mine. What I didn't expect was to be handled like a problem in front of strangers, by family. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The pendant lights over the teller line hummed like soft blue halos. I set my passbook on the counter and said, "$80, please." Melissa lifted her eyes, the way managers do when they smell a policy coming. "Sir, read the sign," she said, loud enough to carry across the tile. The laminated placard, white edges curling from too many winters, announced something about minimum cash withdrawals and available funds may differ. I pointed at the number printed in tidy ink. 3,214. My money, my winter groceries. The house I wired myself one outlet at a time. Available funds are different, she repeated, tapping acrylic with a pink nail. And we don't do under 100 without advance notice. A couple at the coin machine paused. A toddler stopped kicking the waiting bench and watched me like a TV show. I felt heat climb my neck. "I'm not asking for a favor," I said. "I'm asking for $80 of 3,000 I put here." Mrs. Price, the teller who knows me by my coffee breath and union jacket, looked down at her drawer. I saw her throat move, like she'd swallowed the wrong size pill. Melissa printed a slip anyway and slid it over like a parking ticket. Branch assistance fee, $35. The words sat there bold as a dare. Assistance for refusing me? I signed the smallest pen stroke of my life and felt the ground shift a quarter inch to the left. She pointed toward the ATM with her chin. "You can try outside," she said, the smile glued on like a decal. So I tried. The machine burped out a limit notice and spat $60 with the grace of a bad tip. The wind off the lake cut my cheeks raw as I stepped back inside. I placed those 320s under the bright light and said, "I asked my own family for $80. She didn't blink. The receipt clattered next to my hand. The clock read 10:27 a.m. I folded the paper once, then again, smaller than it needed to be, feeling each crease like a decision. On the community board behind the chairs, a cork-pinned photo from their summer picnic showed Melissa in a sundress, Evan, my son, grinning with a hot dog, and me off to the side, laughing at something I can't remember now. I stood there with $60 damp and a brand new charge for assistance, and I realized humiliation sticks to a man's coat like winter salt. You carry it inside whether you want to or not. Back home, I put the receipt on the counter and tried to leave it there. It kept looking at me, so I took a red pen and circled the fee. I wrote Nerve 14 in the margin, underlined it once, and slipped the paper into my bread tin where I used to hide spare keys. I told myself it was just a bad day, a misunderstanding, a manager showing off for the floor. But when I turned on the kettle, the whistle sounded like a warning. The number 3,214 pulsed behind my eyes. And the smallest number, 80, felt like a lock I hadn't realized someone else now held. I washed my cup, dried it twice, and stood in the quiet kitchen while the lake wind milled against the siding. If they wanted me small, they'd miscounted. I don't cry easy, but I keep good records. And a crumpled slip of paper, it turns out, is more than a receipt. It's a beginning. Silence at the kitchen table can feel like an audit. That night, I sat there with my cup of black coffee cooling by the inch, the receipt face down like a guilty photograph. Every few minutes I'd lift it, half hoping the number would change. It never did. $35 branch assistance fee. I kept hearing her voice. "Sir!" Read the sign. The way she said "sir," as if the word itself meant less than. The clock ticked past midnight. And I found myself staring at the grain of the wood table I'd refinished 30 years ago. My late wife, Margaret, used to say this kitchen held every memory that mattered. Christmas dinners, Evan's first haircut, the day we finally paid off the mortgage. Now it held humiliation, printed on thermal paper. By morning, the house smelled like reheated coffee and quiet rage. I called the bank's automated line, punching numbers just to hear them admit it. Balance, $3,214.16. Available balance, $2,879. I hung up before the voice could finish. The missing part wasn't money, it was respect. I stared at the fridge door. Evan's wedding photo was still pinned under a magnet shaped like a hammer. He was beaming, proud, standing beside Melissa, who looked every inch the banker, smile rehearsed, pearls precise. I'd loved her once, like she was my own daughter. That was before she learned how to weaponize a smile. At 9, I took my old coat, the one that still smelled faintly of solder and rain, and walked down Lake Avenue. The wind off Erie cut through every layer. The sky was the same gray as the tile at her branch. I stopped by Frank's barbershop, the very place I'd meant to go before all this nonsense began. Frank looked up from his chair and said, "Hal, you all right? You look like someone cancelled Christmas." I told him the short version, how my daughter-in-law, the bank manager, decided I wasn't qualified to touch my own savings. He whistled low. "That's cold," he said. "You want me to run her picture through the gossip line?" I smiled, but it came out crooked. I paid him with the same 320s the ATM had spat out. He tried to hand one back. "Keep it," I said. She already charged me for the favor. Back home I opened the mail. Gas bill, $128.47 due in 10 days. Another reminder of what I could have paid if I hadn't been treated like a suspect. I flattened the envelope and slid it under the same bread tin as the receipt. Then I sat. I don't know for how long. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere outside, a garbage truck hissed. I heard my own breath like it belonged to someone older. Around noon, my sister Dolores called. She doesn't use small talk. She just goes, "What happened?" I told her. Every detail. The words came out steady at first, then cracked halfway through the phrase, "She called me sir." There was a pause on her end. Then she said quietly, "Bring me every paper you've got tomorrow morning. I'll make coffee." When we hung up, I found myself pacing the kitchen like a man counting debts. The humiliation had hardened into something else, something heavier, sharper. I looked at the passbook again. Nov 14. The date stared back like an entry in a ledger that hadn't closed yet. I opened the drawer where Margaret used to keep birthday candles and took out an old accordion folder. Faded red. I labeled the first pocket with a pen that barely worked. Nov 14. Bank. Inside went the receipt, the ATM slip, and the gas bill. I added one note in the margin. If they want policy, I'll give them proof. That night, I barely slept. At 2:18 a.m., I woke up thinking I'd heard her voice again. Not a nightmare, just the echo of that sir. I got out of bed, turned on the kitchen light, and looked at the folder. I whispered to the empty room, $80. My own voice startled me. I sat down and started writing. Every word, every sentence she said, the time, the place, the fee, the faces. I underlined $214 twice. The act of writing made my hands steady. By dawn, I realized something. Humiliation fades when you turn it into documentation. When the first light hit the counter, I stacked everything neatly, passbook slips, bills, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. The steam rose like a promise. The house was quiet but not empty anymore. It had a witness now, paper. By the time the clock hit 8, I knew what I had to do next. Tomorrow, I'd walk to Dolores's house with my little red folder and every scrap of evidence I owned. I'd stop being sir. I'd start being the man who kept records. And that was the first morning since it happened that I didn't feel small. Not forgiven, not calm, but awake. If humiliation is public, planning has to be private. The morning I took the folder to Dolores's house, the air bit through my coat sleeves. It was November 16th, a Sunday, the kind of gray Cleveland morning when the lake feels close enough to taste. She met me at the door in her robe, hair pinned like she was ready for a cross-examination. "Sit," she said, sliding a legal pad across the table. "Start from the top. Don't dramatize, just the facts." I opened my folder, laid out the receipt, the ATM slip, and the gas bill. She read them the way a judge reads a confession, slowly, carefully, without sympathy but with understanding. When she looked up, she asked, "Did she call you Dad or Sir?" "Sir," Good, she said. That word'll do half the work for us. Dolores had spent 30 years in a courthouse clerk's office. She knew the power of words on paper. We'll need dates, amounts, witnesses, she said, writing as she spoke. Start with what you can prove, not what you feel. By lunch, the pad had 2 pages of notes. Nov 14, incident. $80 denied. 35 fee. Witness, Mrs. Price, teller. $60 ATM withdrawal. She handed me a highlighter. This is evidence of manager discretion abuse. Don't use those words yet, but remember them. She also told me about a man she knew, Mr. Alvarez, retired attorney who still handled elder cases from his home office on Clifton. He owes me a favor, she said. He'll listen. That night I called him. His voice was calm, patient. Bring me the documents tomorrow morning. Don't confront anyone yet, and don't throw anything away. So on November 17th, I took the number 26 bus to his office, a narrow room lined with old law books that smelled like paper and winter. He listened as I told the story. When I finished, he leaned back. You're not angry enough to lose focus. That's good. Focus wins. He explained what he called the leverage of paper. If a manager invokes policy, the burden is on them to produce it. We'll start with a records request, he said, scribbling notes. If they deny or delay, it strengthens your case. He drafted a letter right there on his old typewriter. To whom it may concern, I represent Mr. Harold Whitman regarding a November 14th transaction at your Lakewood branch. Please provide the written policy governing minimum withdrawal limits and manager-assessed branch fees. This request falls under standard banking disclosure. He slid it across the desk for my signature. Send certified. Keep the receipt. Back home, I bought a new lockable file cabinet on November 18th, $120 from Home Depot, assembled it myself, and labeled the drawers. Policy, fees, authority, Thanksgiving. I slid the red folder inside the top drawer, closed it, and felt something click in my chest. The next morning, November 19th, I visited my old union buddy Dan at the Ironworkers Credit Union. He grinned when he saw me. Haven't seen you since the pension party. What brings you in, Hal? I told him briefly, and he frowned. You know, we don't treat folks like that here. You want to open something small, say a checking to get started. I nodded. He helped me fill the form. I deposited $100 as a test. Consider that a seed, he said, handing me a mug with the credit union logo. Grow it. He leaned in before I left. You want me to check if her bank's been flagged for complaints? I smiled. Not yet. Let's play by the book, for now. That evening, Dolores came over with pumpkin bread and her yellow pad. Thanksgiving's next week, she said. Family will be around. You want to talk to her there, where she's less likely to perform. I don't want a scene. You won't need one, she said. Just proof. She suggested a small test. Request the fee schedule in writing. See what language they use. Sometimes policy exposes itself. On November 20th, I stopped by the branch again, timing it for when Melissa was busy. Mrs. Price, the teller, recognized me and slid a folded sheet quietly under the counter. A sticky note read, Page 3. At home, I unfolded it and saw the words that would change everything. Branch assistance, $35, manager discretion. I wrote it down exactly in my ledger. Manager discretion. That was their phrase. Mine would be justice. That night, as I locked the drawer, the oven timer dinged, Dolores's test pie finishing in the kitchen. The sound made me smile. It wasn't about dessert. It was rehearsal. I slipped the page into a new envelope labeled Thanksgiving and stared at her name written neatly on the flap, Melissa. If humiliation was the appetizer, she had no idea what was coming for dinner. If they wanted policy, I'd bring a ledger. By November 20th, the plan wasn't a whisper anymore. It was ink, paper, and patience. I walked back into Lakewood Savings that morning with a steady hand and an old Union calm. The branch smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, the same sterile blend that hides guilt. Mrs. Price was at the counter again. When our eyes met, she gave the smallest nod, an ally's signal. "Morning, Mrs. Price," I said, sliding a folded note across the counter. "Could I get an itemized list of your service fees? Just want to double-check something for my records." Her fingers trembled only slightly as she handed me a printed packet. On top was another yellow sticky note, page 3. I thanked her, tucked it into my jacket, and didn't open it until I was home. The language was the same poison in print. Branch assistance fee, $35, at manager discretion. There it was, proof in 12 words, legal enough to sound proper, vague enough to humiliate anyone they wanted. I circled the line in red, then underlined manager discretion twice. The phrase would become my hinge, what I'd hang my whole case on. That afternoon, Mr. Alvarez typed a follow-up letter to the bank's corporate office requesting a video record of the November 14th incident for review of customer-manager interactions. His tone was polite, firm, and layered with quiet threat. "They'll see the name on the request and know we're serious," he said. "We also filed a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau complaint that same evening." Dolores sat beside me as I dictated the incident into the online form, date, amount, name, and the words, "public humiliation of an elder customer." When I hit submit, it felt like striking a match. By November 21st, Alvarez mailed both letters certified. I kept the postal receipts in a new envelope labeled Evidence, tracking numbers. Meanwhile, Dan from the credit union called. "Hal, your pension can redirect as early as December 1st. You sure you want to move it?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, every penny." "Good," he said. "You'll sleep better once you don't have to ask permission for your own money." That night, I prepared the house like a war room. The kitchen table was my desk. Folders stacked, envelopes labeled in thick marker, policy, fees, Thanksgiving, authority. The oven timer dinged when Dolores's second pie finished cooling, and the sound filled the silence like punctuation. "Use that sound as your signal," she said, laying out plates. "You start talking when the timer goes off. It'll break the tension." I smiled. "You've done this before." She winked. "Clerks know timing, Harold. We live on it." On November 22nd, I drove past the branch once more, parked across the street, and watched through the glass. Melissa stood behind the counter in a red blazer, laughing with a teller. From this distance, she looked like family again, but every laugh sounded in my head like, "Sir." I wasn't angry anymore. I was organized. There's a difference. That evening, I made copies of every document, 3 sets, one for me, one for Dolores, one for Alvarez. I even printed an extra for Dan, in case the credit union needed verification of my pension transfer. In between, I practiced what I'd say at the Thanksgiving table. I didn't want shouting. I wanted silence. The heavy kind that lands after truth. I rehearsed lines quietly as I sealed each envelope. "Melissa, can you explain this policy?" "Evan, what would you call charging your father $35 for asking?" Because I'd call it theft with paperwork. Each envelope carried a story. Nov. E14 receipt. $3,214 balance slip. Fee schedule with manager discretion highlighted. ATM 60-ton limit printout. Before bed, I stacked them all under a label that read simply, "Open after coffee." Then I took my old brass keyring, the one that had opened job sites, tool lockers, and the home Margaret and I built, and added one more, the key to the new file cabinet. I locked it with a click that sounded like closure waiting its turn. The next morning, November 23rd, the frost on the window glittered like sugar, but the inside of me was steel. The plan was simple. Gather, confirm, expose. Thanksgiving would be my audit, and the truth would balance the books. As I left for church, the kettle began to whistle. I turned it off mid-note, smiling. Every sound in this house had meaning now, the timer, the whistle, the click of a lock. Some people pray for forgiveness. I was praying for precision. And by November 28th, when the family gathered and the pies hit the oven, I'd have everything I needed. A case built from paper, patience, and a single word: discretion. Control doesn't always shout. Sometimes it edits your choices until you stop asking. From November 22nd through November 27th, the week crept forward like a storm you can feel but can't yet see. I'd filed my complaints, redirected my pension, and organized my folders so neatly even my late wife would have smiled. But the closer Thanksgiving came, the more I realized the battlefield wasn't the bank. It was the dinner table. Melissa called on November 24th, her voice honeyed but rehearsed. "Dad," she began. First time she'd used that word in months. "Evan and I were thinking, maybe after dinner Thursday you could bring your account paperwork so we can simplify things. Combine, make transfers automatic." Simplify, that word again. I stared at the phone, at the faint reflection of my tired eyes in the screen. "No need," I said softly. "Everything's already in order." There was a pause long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Well," she said, "we'll see you at 6. Don't forget your passbook." When the call ended, I sat back and laughed once, short, sharp, and bitter. They wanted my signature wrapped in gravy and goodwill. That night, I stopped by the grocery store for sweet potatoes and whipped cream. My debit card declined on the first swipe. The young cashier, barely 20, said, "Want me to try again, sir?" The word stung, but she didn't mean it. On the second attempt, it went through. When I checked the receipt, I saw a $12 paper statement fee. Another policy. At home, I added it to my fees folder, underlined it twice, and wrote, "They charge for breathing now." The next day, November 25th, I met Dan for lunch at the diner by the lake. He leaned forward over his sandwich. "Your transfer's queued for December V. Once that hits, they won't touch a dime." He tapped the table. "Still sure about the big reveal?" I nodded. "It's not about payback, Dan. It's about record keeping. They built a paper wall around my money. I'm building one around my dignity." He smiled. "That's the Hal I remember." When I got home that afternoon, the house felt smaller, tighter. Every sound carried weight. I ironed my only good shirt, now polished my shoes, and set the Thanksgiving envelope on the table beside a second one labeled Evan. I wanted him to see it too, my own son. Later that evening, Dolores came by to help with pies and strategy. "You nervous?" she asked, rolling dough like it owed her money. "I'm calm," I said. "Calm scares them more," she grinned. "Good. Remember, you don't accuse, you demonstrate." "Let the paper speak," I nodded. "And you?" She wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll ask one question, that's all. The right one, we practiced it like theatre." She'd glance across the table, fork in hand, and say, "Melissa, which policy allows a manager to assess an assistance fee for refusal?" I'd stay quiet, let the words echo. By November 27th, everything was ready. The house smelled of nutmeg and resolve. I placed the banker's box under my chair at the head of the table and set the Thanksgiving envelopes beneath each plate. One for Melissa, one for Evan, one for myself. I taped a note under the pie dish that said simply, "Signal oven timer." That night before bed I stood by the window. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the air had that waiting feeling. The streetlights blurred through thin frost on the glass. I thought about Margaret, how she would have handled this. She would have told me to keep my temper but not my tongue. I whispered to the empty room. Tomorrow we close the account, just not the one they expect. Then I locked the cabinet, slipped the key into my pocket, and set the oven timer on the counter. I imagined its future ring echoing through the dining room, slicing clean through small talk and pretense. Thanksgiving would come with turkey, family, and the truth. And when that timer dinged, it wouldn't just mean dinner was ready, it would mean I was. The twist wasn't what I found, it was who already knew. Thanksgiving morning broke sharp and bright. sunlight bouncing off the frost like glass. The air carried that quiet pre-holiday calm, the kind that hums before voices fill the house. I'd been up since 6, slicing celery, setting out napkins and checking the envelopes one last time. Every sheet was in order. Receipt dated November 14, fee schedule with manager discretion highlighted, $32 for $14 balance printout, and ATM $60 slip. My handwriting looked steady for once. At 9:10 a.m., the phone rang. It was Mrs. Price, the teller. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Mr. Whitman, I probably shouldn't be calling, but I thought you'd want to know. Corporate sent an internal memo last night. They're reviewing all instances of that manager discretion fee. Your name came up." My hand tightened around the receiver. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying someone at headquarters saw Alvarez's letter," she said. "And they're asking questions about November 14th. I leaned against the counter, stunned for a beat. Justice had already begun to move behind the scenes, quietly, like frost melting under sunlight. "Thank you, Mrs. Price," I said. "You just made my Thanksgiving." By 10:30, Dan texted from the credit union, "Transfer confirmed. Pension moves deck 1. You're free." 2 sentences, but they hit like a sunrise. My financial life had slipped entirely out of Melissa's grasp, and she didn't even know it yet. Still, I didn't cancel the plan. The goal wasn't vengeance, it was truth. And truth needs witnesses. Evan and Melissa arrived around 4:15 p.m. She wore her professional smile, the one that had fooled me for years, and carried a store-bought pumpkin pie as if she'd baked it from scratch. Evan followed, jacket draped over one arm, eyes already scanning the room for tension. "Dad," he said too brightly, handing me a bottle of wine. "We brought this for you," I smiled, calm. "Good timing." "Dinner's almost ready. Just waiting on the oven timer." Dolores arrived minutes later, cheeks pink from the cold, her yellow legal pad peeking from her purse like a loaded weapon. She winked at me once, then kissed Melissa on the cheek. "Lovely dress, dear," we sat. Small talk simmered. The smell of turkey and cinnamon filled the house. Evan talked about his new project at work. Melissa explained some client restructuring. I let them talk. My heart ticked quietly, in sync with the oven timer. At 4:28, my phone buzzed, a new email from Alvarez. The subject line, "Corporate Review, Elder Case Inquiry Opened." I didn't even need to read the body. The timing was poetic. I slipped the phone back into my pocket just as the timer dinged, clear, crisp, cutting through the room. Dolores glanced up from her plate and smiled faintly. Signal received, but before I could speak, Melissa said something that turned the air colder. "Evan," she laughed, "you should have seen your dad last week. He came in asking for $80, like we were running a charity drive. Some people don't understand how policy works." Her tone was half joke, half venom, but it did the job. It gave me my opening. I stood. "You're right, Melissa," I said evenly. "Some people don't understand policy. That's why I brought copies." The smile froze on her face. Evan blinked. Dolores's pen clicked open softly. I pulled out 3 envelopes from under my chair and slid them across the table. "These are for you, for Evan, and for me," I said. "You'll want to read yours carefully. It's good practice." She frowned but opened it anyway. Out spilled the receipt, ATM slip, and printed balance. Her eyes darted from one to the next. "What is this supposed to—" "Page 3, I interrupted. "You'll find the line about branch assistance, manager discretion. That's the policy you used to charge me $35 for asking for 80. The silence that followed was as heavy as the turkey on the table. Evan's voice broke it first. "Melissa, is that true?" She swallowed hard. "That's standard procedure." I laid down the final page, the corporate letter from Alvarez's office. "Apparently not. Corporate disagrees. They opened an investigation yesterday." Her fork clinked against her plate. Evan's hands dropped to his lap. Dolores scribbled one note on her pad and folded it like a verdict. I leaned forward, calm and steady. "My pension moves to the credit union Monday. And as of today, I no longer keep my money or my trust, where respect costs $35. No yelling. No grand gesture. Just truth laid bare." The timer beeped again softly in the background. A second chime like applause for quiet justice, and as Melissa stared at the papers she'd once controlled, I realized something: revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers across a dinner table, disguised as proof. When the plates cleared, the laughter never returned. The night ended early. Evan hugged me at the door, voice low. "Dad, I didn't know. I know you didn't," I said. "But now you do." Behind him, Melissa stayed silent, still holding the receipt like it might rewrite itself if she stared long enough. As their car pulled away, I stood by the window, watching frost form again on the glass. Justice was already in motion, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel cold. Justice can sound like an oven timer. It was 4:30 p.m., Thanksgiving evening, when the first ding split the air. Every sound in the house froze. The laughter, the scrape of cutlery, the soft murmur of Evan's voice. That timer had been waiting all week. I stood, smoothing the front of my shirt, and slid the envelopes across the table. "Before dessert," I said lightly, "I'd like to talk about something that's been on my mind." Melissa's fork hovered over her plate. "Of course," she said, smile stretched thin. "Is this about your account again?" "Exactly that," I gestured to the envelopes. "Open them," Evan frowned, curious. Dolores leaned back, crossing her arms like a silent judge. Inside each envelope sat the same truth. The NOV 14 receipt, the ATM slip for 60, the fee schedule marked page 3, and a printed account balance, 3,014.2260. Numbers don't lie. People just hope you won't check them. Melissa was the first to speak. "I don't understand what this is supposed to—" "This," I interrupted, "is proof of what humiliation costs. $35, to be precise." Her eyes flicked from the receipt to me. "Dad, Sir," I corrected gently. "That's what you called me. Right there at the counter, in front of customers, in front of Mrs. Price. You told me to read the sign, so I did." I tapped the printout. "Page 3. Branch assistance fee at manager discretion." Dolores cleared her throat softly. "Melissa, which policy allows a manager to assess that fee for refusal?" It landed like a gavel strike. Melissa's smile faltered. "It's standard." "Corporate disagrees," I said, sliding another paper forward. "That's from my attorney, Mr. Alvarez, dated Nova 21. Corporate acknowledged my complaint. They're reviewing every manager discretion charge in your branch." Evan looked between us, color draining from his face. "Melissa, is this true?" She opened her mouth, then shut it. I continued, steady, as if reading minutes from a meeting. "My pension transfers to the Ironworkers Credit Union on Desi 1. I've closed overdraft protection, requested a refund of all fees, and filed an elder coercion report with the CFPB. They'll contact you next week." The clock ticked once, twice. Even the house seemed to listen. Melissa's voice cracked. "You didn't have to go that far. We could have handled this privately." I shook my head. Humiliation was public. Justice deserves the same audience. Dolores leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You treated him like a stranger, and now you're surprised he kept the receipts." Evan buried his face in his hands. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "You believed it when she told you it was a misunderstanding," I said quietly. "You believed the word policy meant truth." "It doesn't. It means power." He looked up, eyes wet. "Dad, I should have asked what really happened." "I don't blame you," I said. "You were raised to trust authority. You just forgot who built yours." Dolores gave a single nod. "The kind that ends an argument." The oven timer dinged again, right on cue. I smiled faintly. "Looks like the pies are done," but no one moved. The only sound was the faint crinkle of paper as Melissa set down the receipt. "You planned this," she said softly, almost in awe. "Yes," I said. "Because dignity isn't automatic. You have to file for it, sometimes with postage." She blinked back tears she didn't want to shed. "I was trying to protect the branch. Policies exist for a reason." I met her gaze. "So do boundaries." Evan pushed his chair back. "Melissa, maybe we should—" "No," she said quickly. "Let him finish." I nodded once. "You taught me something important. You showed me how quickly respect turns to control when money's involved. You reminded me that sometimes family hides behind titles, manager, policy, authorized signatory, instead of names. So I built a file, the way you'd build a case. And now, Melissa, the numbers speak louder than we ever will. Dolores reached for her wine. To paper, she said, raising the glass. The only witness that doesn't lie. I smiled but didn't drink. My throat was tight with something halfway between sorrow and relief. Melissa's eyes were distant, her voice small. So this is your revenge? I shook my head. No, this is my correction. The air in the room shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the oldest man at the table. I felt like the one most awake. I gathered the documents back into the banker's box, slid them in neatly, and closed the lid. I think we're done here. Evan stood. Dad, I'll call you tomorrow. We'll sort things out. You don't need to, I said. Things are already sorted. Dolores patted my shoulder as she passed. Dinner was lovely, Harold. She paused by the door, turned to Melissa and said, policies can protect people or expose them. Choose better next time. When the house finally emptied, I sat alone at the table. The timer light blinked on the oven, quiet now. I took the last envelope, my own, and opened it. Inside was a note I'd written days earlier. Proof isn't about winning. It's about remembering who you were before they told you what you're worth. I folded it once more and tucked it into my shirt pocket. Outside, the lake wind howled against the siding, but I didn't feel it. I'd built my own warmth. Some men find justice in courts. Some find it in signatures. I found mine between the lines of a receipt, and as I turned off the kitchen light, I realized something that made me smile. That oven timer wasn't just a cue. It was applause for the quiet kind of revenge that leaves everyone else speechless. Reputation is a balance sheet you can't fix at home. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house felt lighter but quieter. There were no leftover arguments, just the faint smell of cinnamon and paper. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, same as always, except this time the bread tin held no humiliation, only proof. At 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Alvarez. Hal, he said, voice calm and satisfied, corporate confirmed receipt of our filings. They've opened a preliminary review on manager discretion misuse. They'll want to speak with witnesses next week. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Thank you, Counselor, he chuckled. You did most of the work yourself. I just mailed the envelopes. After we hung up, I called Dolores. She'd already heard from Mrs. Price. Word spreading, she said. Melissa's schedule changed. Corporate told her to stay home pending review. You might get a letter soon. I leaned back in my chair. Sunlight hit the counter, glinting off the metal edge of the banker's box. I'm not celebrating, I said, just letting the math balance itself. Good, she replied. But I'd bake another pie if I were you. Justice tastes better warm. By noon, Evan's car pulled into the driveway. He came in without knocking, holding a paper bag of coffee and muffins like an offering. Dad, he started, voice low. I didn't sleep, I gestured to the chair across from me. Then sit. Let's not waste daylight. He sat, eyes rimmed red. I didn't know she treated you that way. She told me you were confused, that you were struggling with memory. I believed her. That's what trust does, I said. It makes smart men slow to check the math. He sighed, rubbing his temples. They suspended her. She's embarrassed, angry, but I told her this isn't about the bank. It's about how she spoke to you. I looked at my son, the boy I'd taught to drive, to wire a socket, to shake hands firmly. You don't have to defend her, Evan. She wrote her own invoice. He exhaled through his nose, quiet and ashamed. She's applying for a transfer to another branch. Out of state. That's probably best, I said. Distance is a good teacher, he nodded. Then softly, Dad, are we okay? I looked at him for a long time. We will be. Once you stop letting people use policy as a language for love. He didn't argue. Just nodded again. The kind of nod that says lesson received. When he left, I opened the mail. Inside was a formal acknowledgement from Lakewood Savings Corporate. Stamped Deck 1 response, due. December 12th. It included an apology for any distress caused by the incident and a promise of a full review of discretionary fee practices. I placed it on the mantel where the Thanksgiving place card used to sit. At 4 p.m., Dan called from the credit union. Hal, pension transfer hit clean. I checked it myself. You're officially one of us. Feels good, I said. Like having my name back, he laughed. Come by next week. I'll print your new debit card. No fees, no nonsense. That night, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea and watched the neighborhood glow under thin snow. Across the street, kids threw snowballs, their laughter echoing through the cold. I thought about all the noise that had filled my life lately. Bank lines, phone calls, family tension, and how this silence finally sounded like freedom. Inside, the oven timer sat on the counter quiet, its cord coiled like a retired weapon. For the first time in weeks, I didn't check my folders before bed. I didn't need to. The paper could rest. The proof had done its job. When I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window. Same face, new calm. They say reputation is a balance sheet. Maybe that's true. But dignity? Dignity's cash on hand. And mine, finally, was paid in full. Justice doesn't always come in sirens or courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives in a plain white envelope. It was December 10th when mine showed up. Thin, official, and stamped Lakewood Savings Corporate Division. Confidential. I set it down beside my morning coffee and stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter on crisp stationery. We sincerely apologize for the distress caused by the incident at our Lakewood branch on November 14th. After internal review, we have determined that the branch assistance fee was applied in error and inconsistent with company policy. A full refund of $47, including related statement charges, has been issued to your account. We value your long-standing relationship and are taking corrective action to ensure this does not happen again. At the bottom, there was a signature, not printed but handwritten by the regional manager. I could almost see the effort in the pen stroke, the small hesitation of someone trying to sound sincere. I smiled faintly, not because of the money, because they'd said the one word that had hung in the air since November 14th, error. I picked up the cashier's check that came with it, smooth and new. The same institution that had once refused me $80 now offered me $47 back in apology. I laid it flat on the counter beside the old receipt, the two pieces of paper facing each other like mirror images. That's what justice looks like sometimes. Symmetry. I called Alvarez. They refunded the fees, I said. He chuckled softly. Good, paper wins again. Anything about disciplinary action? Just corrective measures. Whatever that means. It means someone's getting a performance review. We both laughed. But mine was quiet. I wasn't interested in her downfall. I was interested in something else. Closure. That afternoon I walked down to the credit union. The snow was light, the air bright. Dan waved from his office window as I entered. You got mail from the enemy? He teased. Final settlement, I said, handing him the check. He held it up to the light and whistled. Nice, want to deposit it? Not yet, I said. I want to remember it first, he nodded. Understood. Some money's worth more uncashed. We sat at his desk and talked about small things, weather, pensions, the Browns losing again. When I stood to leave, he handed me a small business card with bold print. Your money. Your rules. Consider that your new policy, he said. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from anger this time, but something else. Purpose. So I called Dolores. You still have that contact at the community center? She hesitated. The Lakeside Hall one. Yeah, I want to host a talk. Something simple. How to read a fee schedule. How to spot exploitation. What to say when someone hides behind policy. She laughed softly. You're turning this into a class. Maybe. I don't want to be the last person who learns the hard way. She paused. I'll book you a slot. December 18th. You bring the coffee. I'll bring the cookies. The week went fast. I printed flyers on my old home printer, Know Your Balance, a simple talk for seniors. Hosted by Harold Whitman. By the time December 18th rolled around, the community hall smelled of peppermint and folding chairs. A dozen people came, mostly retirees, a few younger faces who'd heard about the bank story. Dolores handled the sign-in sheet, and I stood at the front with my banker's box beside me. I started the way all confessions should start, with truth. 2 months ago, I asked for $80. Instead, I got humiliated. But what I learned since then is something I wish someone had taught me sooner. Always read the fine print, especially when it's written in a smile. They chuckled softly, then listened hard. I told them about the receipt, the manager discretion, the complaint, and the letter of apology. I held up the documents, not as trophies, but as tools. This isn't revenge, I said. This is accountability. And you don't need a lawyer to demand that. You just need paper, patience, and a pen that doesn't run dry. Afterward, an elderly woman approached me, small and pale, her hands shaking slightly. I thought it was just me, she said. My daughter handles my account. Sometimes she tells me I'm too forgetful to see statements. Maybe I should start keeping copies too. I handed her a blank folder from my box. Start today, I said. Name it after yourself. You earned that right. When the session ended, Dolores hugged me. You realize you just turned your worst day into everyone else's warning. I smiled. Good. Maybe humiliation has interest if you invest it right. Later that night, I sat by the window again, watching the snow fall under the streetlight. The receipt, the letter, the check, all lay on the counter like old friends who'd finally stopped arguing. Justice didn't roar, it whispered. It moved through certified mail, acknowledgement letters, and quiet transfers of power. I thought about Melissa. I hadn't heard from her since Thanksgiving. Evan said she'd taken a temporary leave from the bank. Maybe she was somewhere filling out her own forms, learning what apology feels like on paper. I hope so. Not out of spite, out of fairness. Everyone deserves to face their own audit eventually. I poured myself another cup of coffee and wrote one last note for my file. Case closed. Respect refunded. Account settled. Then I smiled. Not the proud kind, just the peaceful kind that comes when you know the numbers finally add up. Aftermath is the long math, the quiet adding up of what's left once the noise clears. It was December 15th, 2 weeks after the refund, when life finally began to feel like mine again. The house had a strange peace to it, familiar but freer. No tension humming through the walls, no papers stacked like armor. The red folder stayed locked away in the cabinet, but the cabinet didn't feel like a vault anymore. It felt like closure with hinges. Evan stopped by that morning with 2 cups of coffee and a box of pastries. He looked better, less haunted, more human. We sat at the table where everything had fallen apart and somehow begun again. He broke the silence first. Mom always said you'd end up teaching people something, he said with a small smile. I laughed. She probably didn't mean finance. She meant principle, he said, his tone more serious now. Melissa's. Well, she's been quiet. She's applying for jobs out of state. I think she's embarrassed, Dad. Not angry, embarrassed. That's the right reaction, I said softly. Anger would have meant she didn't understand. He nodded. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. Said she handled it wrong. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a slow release. Tell her I accept the apology, I said finally. But tell her respect's not refundable. Once it's spent, it's spent. He smiled faintly. You really do talk like a bank statement now. Then maybe I've learned something from her after all. We talked for a while, about old neighbors, the Browns, even the church raffle coming up next month. The conversation flowed easy, no balance sheet between us this time. When he left, I realized how good it felt not to be angry anymore. That afternoon, I took a walk along the frozen lakefront. The air smelled clean, the kind of cold that makes you grateful for every breath. I passed the branch where everything had happened. Through the glass, I saw a new manager's name on the desk plaque. The space looked different, same walls, different energy. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I'd already closed that account in every way that mattered. Back home, I sorted through the last of my files. From the pile, I kept only one small folder, the one marked Lessons. Inside, I placed a copy of the corporate apology, the check stub, and a handwritten note I'd written for myself on a yellow slip. You can't control how they treat you, but you can control the record of it. I pinned that note to my refrigerator. Right next to it, I taped Dan's card. Your money, your rules. That evening, I baked another pie, apple this time, and brought it to Dolores's place. She greeted me at the door with that knowing grin. "No legal pad tonight?" I joked. She poured us both tea. "You're finally resting," she said. "It suits you." "I'm not resting," I said. "I'm done counting." She laughed. "That's the same thing, Harold." Before leaving, I gave her the extra key to the file cabinet. "In case I ever forget why I kept all this," I said. "You won't forget," she said. "You turned paper into peace." On the drive home, I passed Lakewood Savings one more time. The lights were dim, a single "We're hiring" sign taped to the door. I didn't stop. I just nodded once and kept driving. When I got home, I wrote one last line in my ledger before putting it away for good. Sometimes the best revenge is just living without the lesson repeating. Then I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, sat by the window and listened to the lake wind. It sounded different now, less like warning, more like applause. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim or a warrior. I just felt like Harold Whitman again, retired, respected, and finally free of overdraft on my peace. The last person who signs off on your dignity is you. A few days before Christmas, a postcard arrived in the mail from Lakewood Savings. Red border, snowflakes, and a printed line in cheerful script, "We value your relationship." I stood there at the kitchen counter, reading those words, and laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Relationship, what a word for what we'd had. They'd charged me $35 to remind me I didn't have one. I set the postcard next to the refund. Check, the same amount they'd mailed, with all that polished regret, and took a photo of the two side by side. One said error, the other said we care. Together, they looked like the before and after of a conscience. I didn't mail anything back. Some debts don't deserve acknowledgement. The next morning, December 20th, I drove down to the credit union. The snow was crisp, the roads nearly empty. Dan waved as I came through the door, holding a new envelope. "Got your debit card ready, Hal. No fees, no fine print." He slid it across the counter. A simple piece of plastic, no pretense, no hidden charges. Just my name. "Harold Whitman. Feels different when it's yours, doesn't it?" He said. "It does," I replied. "Feels like oxygen." I withdrew $80 cash just because I could. 8 tens, fresh, clean, mine. Dan grinned. "Big spender," I laughed. "Nah, just settling an old account." As I walked out into the cold, I stopped by the bulletin board near the door. Someone had pinned a printout of a local news clipping. Bank customer raises awareness about elder financial control. There was no name, but the story was familiar, down to the detail of the $35 fee. I smiled. Maybe Mrs. Price had told someone. Maybe Alvarez had shared the story at a conference. Maybe it didn't matter. Justice, it seemed, had a way of echoing without needing credit. The sky was pale blue that morning, the kind of winter light that feels honest. I climbed into my truck, the heat still slow to start, and spread the 8 bills across the steering wheel. I thought about how something so simple, a withdrawal, had taught me so much about power, respect, and silence. People think revenge is loud, cinematic. Mine came in the mail, typed on letterhead. And yet, holding those $80 felt better than any victory speech. Back home, I put the cash in an old cigar box labeled Emergency Fund. Margaret's handwriting was still on the side, faded but steady. I closed the lid gently and whispered, "You'd have laughed at all this, wouldn't you?" The oven timer dinged in the kitchen, a sound that used to mean justice. Now it just meant the pie was done. I poured myself a slice of quiet and sat by the window, watching the lake freeze into glass. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 6 times. I thought about Melissa, not with anger, not even pity, just understanding. People like her mistake control for competence. They forget that real power comes from restraint, not authority. I lifted my coffee mug in a small toast to the empty room. To lessons paid in full. The wind outside rattled the window once, then settled. When I looked down, one of the $10 bills had unfolded itself slightly, edges curling like it wanted to escape. I smiled, folded it neatly, and tucked it back in the box, because some things are worth keeping, not for their value, but for the reminder. And as I turned out the light, I thought, you didn't lose me, Melissa. You priced me out. And in doing so, you taught me the worth of my own name. That's the final balance. Account closed.